It is a dark time for penicillins. Although the first death caucus has been destroyed, beta-lactamase-producing staphylococcal species have crushed the rebellion. A group of anti-staphylococcal freedom fighters, however, led by nafcillin, have established a new secret base on a remote planet and continue the fight. And so our tour of beta-lactam antibiotics continues. And believe me, this sequel is way better than the first one. Arguably the best in the series. Okay, so beta-lactam antibiotics are again represented by our beta-lactam ringed planet. Construction has secretly begun on a new death caucus, and notice again that the D-ala structure is exposed, as the penicillin binding proteins, represented by construction workers, build the cell wall. Just like we covered in the penicillin sketch, these anti-staph penicillins inhibit the transpeptidation reaction at the bacterial cell wall by covalently binding, or in this case shooting down, PBPs, halting peptidoglycan synthesis and killing the cell. That makes it bactericidal. This time the rebels came prepared, because their ships have bulky armor, representing bulky R groups that prevent beta-lactamase binding. So the plasmid-encoded beta-lactamase guards strike back, but their retaliatory fire is deflected. These anti-staphylococcal penicillins have a narrow spectrum of activity, and they are often the drug of choice for methicillin-sensitive, penicillin-resistant strains of staphylococci. Remember that the bugs susceptible to these bulked-up penicillins are called methicillin-sensitive, but methicillin is no longer used clinically due to high rates of adverse events. Instead, remember NAF for staph, and oxacillin for staphylococcus. Just rolls right off the tongue. Anyways, take a look at the foreground here, and we have nafcillin represented by this rebel fighter with a purple pencil-shaped staff. Look familiar? Yep, it's the same nafcillin staff from the sketchy micro Staph aureus sketch. And if you haven't seen the Staph aureus sketch yet, it's like the Godfather Part 2 of our sketchy micro series. It's pretty good. You should check it out. The horned creature that he's sitting on will represent oxacillin, cloxacillin, dicloxacillin, which all have ox in them, hence the ox horns. To emphasize their narrow spectrum of activity, notice how all the space stations around the Death Caucus are purple spheres in clusters to represent gram-positive staphylococci. When given orally, anti-staph penicillins are suitable for treatment of mild to moderate localized staph infections. For example, they're commonly used empirically to treat skin and soft tissue infections like folliculitis and abscesses, for which Staph aureus is a common cause. And notice how our staff-wielding rebel is sitting on one of the beast's big, red, yet surprisingly supportive humps, which almost looks like a big inflamed abscess. When given by IV infusion, anti-staph penicillins can be the drugs of choice for serious systemic staphylococcal infections, including staph endocarditis, as represented here by these tricuspid pyramids on the horizon, and staph osteomyelitis, represented by these fish skeletons strewn in the sand. In general, remember that these staph-killing drugs have a similar side effect profile as penicillins, such as hypersensitivity reactions and interstitial nephritis. So check out that penicillin video for important beta-lactam side effects. Alright, before we move on with our tour, let's talk about methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. MRSA produces PBPs that have low affinity for binding beta-lactam antibiotics. These altered penicillin binding proteins, then, render our anti-staphylococcal freedom fighters, like nafcillin, completely powerless. So the anti-staph ships that were initially shooting down the PBP construction workers to halt cell wall synthesis are now thwarted by altered PBPs, represented by these upgraded troops who continue peptidoglycan wall synthesis as the rebel missiles bounce off. In previous sketches, MRSA is always associated with a merciless golden staff-wielding pharaoh, and it looks like he's back. as none other than the fan favorite, Dark Lord MRSA.
I find your lack of activity against altered PvPs disturbing.
And then he chokes that one British guy. I mean, why would you talk back to him? I mean, look at him. Alright, let's sum up this sketch. Remember that your anti-staphylococcal penicillins are more resistant to beta-lactamases. They can be used for localized and systemic staph infections, but are not active against MRSA. Next on our tour, I think we'll take a little detour. I know a cantina near here.